The clock struck 2 in the morning. A haunting silence filled the air, disturbed only by the occasional creaking of the old prison building. The lone officer on duty sat at his desk, the fluorescent light casting long shadows in the eerie stillness. A flicker of movement caught his attention. A figure, a person, walking across the range and slipping into the shower area. His heart pounded in his chest. It was impossible. He was the only officer there, and all the inmates were locked down for the night. Yet, there it was. As real as the cold steel of the prison bars, a person had moved in the shadows. The officer leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Was it an escaped inmate, a trick of the light, or something else? Something supernatural? He had heard the stories, of course. Every old building had its tales of ghostly apparitions and unexplained phenomena, but he never put much stock in such things. His curiosity piqued, he decided to investigate. Pushing back his chair, he stood up, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. He glanced at the cell adjacent to the shower area. A Native American inmate sat there, his eyes wide with shock. He asked the officer if he had seen it too. The officer nodded, a lump forming in his throat. They shared a nervous laugh, an attempt to brush off the fear that clung to them like a second skin. The ghost, they said, was that of a Native American who had hanged himself in that very housing unit decades earlier. It was rumored to appear to other Native Americans when they were in the unit. The officer didn't know if he believed it, but he couldn't deny what he had seen. As he stood up, a chill ran down his spine. The air suddenly seemed colder, and the silence even more deafening. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the investigation. What he would discover, he had no idea. But he knew one thing for sure: that night would forever be etched in his memory as the late-night encounter. As the officer approached the cells, a voice from the shadows called out to him. It was the Native American inmate, his eyes wide with fear, yet filled with a strange kind of recognition. His voice trembled, a stark contrast to the cool, composed demeanor he usually carried. "Did you see that too, officer?" he asked, his voice barely rising above a whisper. The officer nodded, his own heart pounding in his chest. They shared a moment of disbelief, a moment of shared dread that seemed to hang in the air, as tangible as the cold steel bars of the cells. The inmate leaned closer, a flicker of curiosity and dread in his eyes. "That wasn't just any ghost, officer," he said. "That was a native spirit, one of our own." His voice dropped to a whisper, filled with a reverence and fear that sent chills down the officer's spine. The officer, despite his fear, couldn't help but ask, "Who was he?" The Native American inmate's face took on a somber expression. "He was one of us, a native brother who found himself trapped within these walls, just like us, but he couldn't take it. The despair, the hopelessness, it was too much for him. He hung himself in this very housing unit years ago." His words echoed in the officer's mind, painting a haunting image of the ghost's tragic past. A man driven to such despair that he took his own life, his spirit forever bound to the place of his death. The officer felt a shiver run down his spine. The ghost was not just a figment of his imagination. It was a tangible reminder of the prison's dark history, a history that had long been forgotten, but was now staring him in the face. The officer, with a lump in his throat, realized he wasn't alone. There was a resident ghost in the prison, and this ghost, it seemed, was as much a part of the prison as the inmates and the officers themselves, a chilling testament to the prison's past, forever haunting its present. Tales of the ghost had been whispered among inmates for decades. The apparition was not just a spectral figment of one's imagination, but a tangible part of the prison's history, a tragic tale woven into the very fabric of its walls. The ghost was not a menacing entity. His silent presence was felt more than it was seen, especially among the Native American inmates. It was as if he sought out those who shared his heritage, perhaps in a bid to connect, to find some solace in the shared lineage. His appearance was not marked by fear, but by an eerie calmness. A silent visitor in the dead of the night, he would sit at the end of the beds, silently observing the living, a spectral echo of a life once lived. His story, though tragic, had become a part of the prison folklore. A Native American inmate, he had taken his own life within the confines of the prison. The exact reasons behind his desperate act are lost to time. However, what remained was his spirit, eternally trapped within the prison walls, forever wandering the halls and cell blocks. He was a silent testament to a life lost too soon, a constant reminder of the harsh realities of prison life, the desperation one can feel when trapped within these cold, unfeeling walls. He was a symbol, a grim reminder of the human cost of incarceration. Yet, despite the grim context of his existence, the ghost was a source of comfort for some. His presence was a reminder that they were not alone in their struggles, that even in death, there was a sense of community, a shared understanding of the hardships they faced. His legacy lived on, not just in whispered tales among the inmates, but in the quiet acknowledgement of his existence. The ghost of the Native American inmate was not just a chilling tale spun to scare the new inmates. He was a part of the prison's fabric, a silent observer of the lives that unfolded within its walls. The ghost was more than a chilling tale. He was a silent reminder of a life lost too soon. In the stillness of the night, another young inmate had an unsettling visit. There he was, a fresh face in this world of bars and cold cement, unaccustomed to the eerie silence that fell over the cells after lights out. That's when he saw him. A figure, more shadow than man, sitting at the foot of his bed. He described him as a native dude, a term that hinted at his youth and naivety. He said the figure was silent, etched in the dim glow that sneaked in from the corridor. He was just sitting there, at the end of the bed, watching him, not with malice or intent, but with a sort of detached curiosity, as if he were a relic of a forgotten time, observing a world that had moved on without him. The young inmate recounted how time seemed to stretch, the minutes morphing into an eternity under the specter's gaze. The air grew dense, as if the very atmosphere was absorbing the heaviness of this spectral presence. He wasn't sure if he was dreaming or awake, the line between reality and nightmare blurring in the presence of this otherworldly visitor. His heart pounded in his chest, the rhythm echoing in the silence of the cell. He wanted to cry out, to break the oppressive quiet, but fear glued his words to his tongue. He could only watch as the figure continued to study him, the silence growing louder with each passing second. And then, as abruptly as he had appeared, the figure vanished. The oppressive weight lifted, the air returning to its usual stagnant self, and time resumed its steady march forward. The young inmate was left alone once again, the silence now echoing with the memory of his spectral visitor. The young inmate's words sent shivers down the officer's spine. The ghost was real and he was not alone. The prison was filled with unspoken fear, a haunting presence lurking in the shadows. An eerie stillness pervaded the cell blocks, broken only by the occasional clanging of metal doors or the distant echo of footsteps. The spectral Native American was no longer a mere tale told in hushed whispers, but a chilling reality that the officer and inmates had to grapple with. This spectral presence, once a living, breathing being, had become an integral part of the prison folklore. His ghostly figure was a constant reminder of the prison's dark past, a past marked by despair and irreversible decisions. The prison, built to confine the living, now seemed to be a dwelling for the spirits as well. It was as though the prison walls, steeped in history and bathed in sorrow, had somehow absorbed the essence of those who'd met their untimely end within its confines. The officer found himself not just guarding the living, but also sharing his space with the spirits of the past. He was no longer just a custodian of the law, but also an unwilling participant in this spectral theater. It was a thought that sent shivers down his spine, yet it was a reality he had to live with. The inmates too found themselves living in constant fear. Every creak, every shadow, every unexplained noise was attributed to the spectral presence. The ghost had become a chilling reminder of their own mortality, a spectral figure that seemed to say, "This could be you." Despite the fear and the constant unease, life in the prison went on. The officer continued his rounds, the inmates served their time, all in the company of the spectral Native American. He was their constant companion, a silent observer, a reminder of the prison's unforgiving past. In the end, the officer realized, he wasn't just guarding the living, he was also sharing his space with the spirits of the past. The prison, it seemed, was home to more than just the living. It was home to the echoes of the past, to stories untold, and to an unspoken fear that lingered in its cold stone walls.